You know, we tend to think of medicine as this world of absolute certainty, definitive tests, clear-cut answers. But what if its greatest strength, its real art, is actually found in navigating the unknown? Today, we're going to dive into the crucial role of uncertainty in medicine and how embracing it can actually lead to way better care. And this idea isn't new. This quote comes from Sir William Osler, one of the founders of modern medicine, and it just perfectly frames what we're talking about. Medicine isn't just about memorizing facts. It's about making wise judgments when you don't have all the facts. It's a science for sure, but it is very much an art. So to really get this, let's actually go back in time. We're going to Johns Hopkins Hospital around 1895 to watch a true master at work, because it was there that Dr. William Osler taught his students a lesson that kind of flipped everything they thought they knew about being a doctor on its head. So picture this. Dr. Osler, he's got a fresh flower in his lapel, and he walks into the hospital ward. He sits right down with the patient, he listens, he examines them himself. Then he turns to his students. But instead of just confirming their diagnosis, he starts asking questions that shake their confidence. Questions like, well, what else could this be? What evidence do you have that goes against your theory? What would you expect to see if you were wrong? See, he wasn't teaching them to be certain faster. He was teaching them the incredible discipline of staying uncertain longer. And that right there, that's the heart of it. The real challenge in medicine isn't some failure of knowledge that we need to stomp out. No, uncertainty is a fundamental reality of the job. The real skill is learning how to navigate it with wisdom and with care. So how in the world does a doctor develop this skill? Well, it really requires balancing two very different kinds of knowledge. And it's a distinction that, believe it or not, philosophers have been talking about since ancient Greece. Let's break it down. Okay, on one hand, you've got episteme. This is all the textbook stuff, right? Scientific facts, data from big clinical trials, the official guidelines. It's the universal, provable knowledge. But then, on the other hand, there's phronêsis. And this is practical wisdom. It's the good judgment, the years of experience, the intuition you need to apply all that textbook knowledge to the unique individual human being sitting right in front of you. And this example just makes it so incredibly clear. The evidence-based guideline, that's the episteme. It might say, hey, we need to escalate this treatment. But if that patient's most important goal is just to be home one last time, a doctor needs phronêsis to weigh the guideline against that person's humanity. It's not about ignoring the evidence. It's about seeing beyond what the evidence alone can tell you. Okay, so this brings up a huge question. If doctors are always working in this gray area, what kind of tools can they actually use to make good decisions? Well, it turns out they have a kind of mental toolkit for grappling with all this probability. So a really core concept here is something called Bayesian thinking. The basic idea is that a diagnosis isn't a yes or no right from the start. It's a probability. When a doctor first meets you, they have an initial idea. Then, every single new piece of information, every lab result, every physical finding, updates that probability, making the diagnosis either more likely or less likely. It's a formal way of just getting less wrong over time. And building on that is the threshold model, which helps doctors figure out when to act. See, if the probability of a disease is super low, below what they call the don't test threshold, running a test could actually do more harm than good, through false positives. And if it's very high, above the treat threshold, well, it's probably time to start treatment. It's really only in that murky, uncertain middle corridor where more testing is actually useful. But collecting all this data comes with its own traps. And one of the biggest is something called spurious precision. A lab result that comes back as 147.32 feels incredibly precise, right? It feels so certain. But clinically, the difference between 147.32 and, say, 148 is completely meaningless. The only useful piece of information there is that the value is significantly elevated. It's a huge mistake to confuse how precise a measurement is with how important it is. Which leads to this kind of counterintuitive question. We're all trained to think that more information is always better. But in medicine, is that really true? This is where a really interesting concept called satisficing comes in. It's a mashup of the words satisfy and suffice. And what it means is that in the real world, where you can literally never have all the information, the rational goal isn't perfection. It's finding a solution that's good enough. And here is why this matters to every single one of us. Chasing after absolute certainty with more and more and more tests can be actively harmful. It leads to finding things by accident, to more anxiety, to unnecessary procedures. Sometimes the most professional, the most rational, and the most patient-centered decision is to accept that
good enough is the absolute best you can do. So let's look at how all of this completely changes the nature of the doctor-patient relationship. I mean, if medicine is fundamentally uncertain, then it can't be a one-way street of just giving instructions anymore. It has to become a conversation.
The philosopher Honora O'Neill just hits the nail on the head here. Real trust isn't built on a doctor pretending to have all the answers. It's actually built on the exact opposite, on honest communication about the limits of what we know. Just think about the contrast here. In what you might call a strategic conversation, the doctor has already decided what's best, and the goal is really just to get the patient to agree. Uncertainty is a problem to be hidden. But in a discourse model, the conversation is a true partnership. The doctor shares what they know and what they don't know. The patient shares what matters most to them, and together they search for the best path forward. And this is a huge shift in thinking. Uncertainty isn't some roadblock to good medical care. It's the very reason that a deep, respectful conversation between a doctor and a patient is so absolutely essential in the first place. Okay, this brings us to our final point, and it might be the one that requires the most courage and professionalism from a doctor. It's about embracing the power of 3 very simple but very, very difficult words. In a culture that basically equates doctors with answers, admitting, "I don't know," can feel like a personal failure. I mean, everything about the job, the white coat, the technology, the years and years of training, it all signals certainty. Saying those 3 words creates this vacuum, and that can be scary for both the doctor and the patient. But here's the thing, not knowing isn't just one single thing. It really has layers. You've got diagnostic uncertainty, that's temporary, like we're still waiting on the results. Then there's prognostic uncertainty, where you know the disease, but you have no idea how it's going to unfold for this specific person. And finally, you have existential uncertainty, the why me questions that medicine simply has no answers for. And communicating this stuff doesn't have to be vague at all. Using precise, honest language like, based on what we see right now, the most likely explanation is, or the evidence points towards this, but it doesn't prove it. That is not a sign of a weak or incompetent doctor. It's the hallmark of a confident professional who respects the truth and who respects their patient.
And that leaves us with one final thought. We all want certainty from our doctors, right? Especially when we're scared. But after everything we've talked about today, what if the most reassuring, the most competent, and the most trustworthy answer a doctor could possibly give is simply and honestly, "We don't know yet, but we are going to figure this out together."